Chapter 3. Completed. Best citizens of our glorious Republic, volunteers responded to the call of our ancient and faithful ally Albiona. A legion was formed, called the Golden Lion Legion, one of the best of the history of the Republic. To command such a powerful force, the Senate implored me that I, General Adrian de Paulo, the hero, de Gran Venue and Alasha, will command the expedition. I accepted such an undertaking with great modesty the objective of making the Republic proud of our actions in the Iron War. Extraordinary events in the Domemba campaign. Author, Belix, L. Perpicaz, Gabala. Biographer of General Adrian. General Adrian de Paulo smiled satisfied. After a disappointing, tedious and long siege, the alliance had finally decided to make the final attack on the royal palace of King Dasmir II. Despite the fact that His Majesty had made a great effort to reinforce the defences of his palace, General Adrian was sure that this day would fall into the hands of the alliance. The attack was to be carried out at the same time on all four flanks of the palace, whose troops were isolated and demoralized. The legion he commanded was Caesar's Republic's only aid to the White Blade Alliance. It was an express request of Albiona to the Republic. Upon receiving the request in Caesar, the Senate had to deliberate, and as always the decision was subject to heated debate. Many senators were reluctant to participate in a conflict in which most of the kingdoms of the Dragon Dorsal were involved. Taking sides meant earning many enemies and grudges in the future. But in the end the weight of the old alliances won. The argument that these ties should be respected was too forceful. Albiona was always a faithful ally of the Republic, and this tipped the balance. In the end, the pro-intervention faction narrowly won the vote. Because it was such a close result, and to ingratiate itself with the faction that wanted to remain neutral in the conflict, in the final resolution it was decided to only send an expeditionary legion made up exclusively of volunteer soldiers. The Senate put the young and ambitious General Adrian in command of the legion. And all went well until the arrival of Domemba in the kingdom. The main problem is that the alliance was not as united as it seemed. Each kingdom had very marked interests and did not want to collaborate intensely in the achievement of the objectives of the other kingdoms. The dwarfs wanted possession of the northern mines and were reluctant to fight with men, although in the taking of the red mines it seemed that they would act in combination. Albiona's generals were more interested in enhancing their personal glory before the new monarch than in being effective in war. And the king of Scythia seemed fearful and self-conscious about the fact that he had betrayed his allies in the Dorsal League, and was hesitant about any decision that had to be made. That is why his legion was very intelligently assigned to Scythia. Adrian would exert the necessary influence to make the king much more incisive in the attack. Adrian was the one who masterminded the collapse of the Grand Canal at the beginning of the war, an action that put the entire kingdom of Domemba in check and caused a great advantage for the alliance. After that, nothing more, until at last Adrian's pressures were effective and the king ordered the great palace to be besieged, taking advantage of the fact that Domebra's forces were widely dispersed. Adrian wanted King Dasmir's head on a silver platter, a great triumph that would increase his popularity within the Republic, as they liked nothing more than a beheaded king. Now there was Adrian on the top of a hill, waiting for the signal. He wore his full armor. His personal biographer wrote down the harangue speech to the troops. The young general proudly commanded his legion, ready in attack formation. They would attack from the northern flank of King Dasmir's palace. The once splendid palace now looked horrible as a result of the siege. On the west flank stood out its enormous canal that supplied it with water but was completely dry. And because of that dry basin the palace was more vulnerable. In that area Albiona's troops would attack accompanied by a small dwarf contingent. The southern flank would be attacked by the royal army of Scythia, but it was rather a distraction to disperse the defenders since their fame as warriors was not very high, nor did they seem very committed. On the western flank some mercenary companies from Almera would attack. the defenders had nothing to do. So when they saw the arrows full of flames rising through the still dark sky, the general ordered his legion to advance. General Adrian didn't like being a more than competent warrior very much, being on the front line, too much dirt for his exceptional armor. He left the hard part of the combat to his subordinates. He stood in the rear with the legion's banner and his personal guard. In addition, the standard had been designed by himself, a lion holding the coat of arms of the Republic. At the moment the advance was going as expected. The two dwarf detachments together with Albionna's battalions advanced along the dry bed of the canal, and the light cavalry of Scythia together with its infantry attacked the front of the palace, while the mercenaries advanced with hardly any opposition. An almost certain victory, the maniples of his legion advanced without mishap. There were no defenders on so many fronts, they would soon reach the wall and climb it without problems. The general was so confident of victory that he advanced to the front much earlier than was usual for him. He wanted the head of King Dasmir too. His soldiers reached the wall with hardly any resistance. It was then that something totally unforeseen happened. Just as the legionnaires were about to begin the assault on the palace, the central part of the wall collapsed, burying the first manipulator under its stones. An army of soldiers led by the king himself came out of the interior of the palace. The assailants did not expect such a surprising action and were disorganized. General Adrian ordered with his trumpets that the maniples maintain formation, but it was impossible. The soldiers retreated in a disorderly manner. In addition, the defenders acted intelligently. They did not advance much more than a dozen meters, just enough to cause confusion and return to their defensive positions. Still, General Adrian smiled, a very bold move, but a door had been opened for them. He ordered his cavalry, arranged in the rear, to prepare to make a charge with him in command. Nothing could be done by the defenders now that there was a breach in the wall. It was then that a messenger arrived, very nervous. "Lord, the army of Scythia is withdrawing." "Excuse me." "If General, they withdraw, totally decimated." "It's impossible." "They have received reinforcements, a large army is approaching, the vanguard of that army has annihilated the army of Sicily and the attackers of the Eastern Channel." General Adrian could not assimilate the news. A moment ago they were about to take the palace of Domemba, and now they informed him that the defeat was total. "My lord, it is better to retreat south as soon as possible. Our legion cannot stand against such a huge army." Disgusting decisions. They only had to resist a measly hour. General Adrian ordered the retreat immediately. He had had King Dasmir's head on a platter. He was furious. He must vent his anger on someone. When he arrived at the camp, he immediately ordered that they introduce him to the prisoners they had. They showed them to him, and without a word he killed all of them one by one until his thirst for blood was completely satisfied. When he finished with the last one, the captain of the explorers of the King of Domemba, his soldiers warned him that he must flee quickly. In her haste she forgot her dagger in the bowels of such an insignificant being. Vanus used to be exclusively dedicated to the care of Arian and Ara's daughter, but since her mother was staying in Kazmin, Debok decided to use her precious Kendali skills. Aras, who knew her well, knew that the Kendalis were underestimated, but with only 100 of them the greatest of the kingdoms could be annihilated. Kendalis are skilled warriors, elusive assassins, and their ability to shapeshift and make themselves invisible make them the perfect warriors for the most complicated missions. Gosberg suggested that it was best to send the Kendali to the palace of Domemba to coordinate the action of the two armies against the besiegers. It was not difficult for her to reach the king's palace transformed into an eagle and return to the positions of the army of the League to receive the communication from King Dasmir. And so it was that they coordinated. The army of the League stopped its march to make their arrival coincide with the moment when the besieging army made its attack. They had to advance in the dark all night, while the bulk of the defenders set a trap for the most powerful troops of the alliance, the Legion of the Republic of Sicily. The plan was risky, but they didn't have many other options to achieve a victory that would end the siege. They knew the army of Scythia very well, and as soon as it was surrounded by two fronts it fled in disarray. They were not troops for great battles. The soldiers of Scythia were accustomed to skirmishes in their great prairies thanks to their bows and swift horses. To attack a palace was to use them in a scenario for which they were not prepared. As always, the dwarfs were very brave and resisted to the end, allowing the rest of the alliance troops to flee to safer positions. The army of the League was received with full honors inside the royal palace of Domemba. King Dasmir himself received Dubok and the rest of the mercenaries. The plan has gone wonderfully. It was risky, but we are not in a position to do simple things. Your Majesty. Where is Agnorok? I want to congratulate him on his victory in the Red Mines. My lord, he is with his battalion trying to harass Caesar's legion. Indeed, Agnorok, once the perimeter of the palace was secured, advanced northward seeking to finish off as many legionaries as he could. They were among the best units in the alliance, and you had to try to cause them as much damage as possible in a moment of weakness like on this occasion. But the legion was a very well-trained troop and knew how to organize a retreat. In the end the half-orc was satisfied with reaching the camp. To harass them would be to tire out his own men after a march with hardly any rest from the Red Mines. So he examined the camp until he saw at the bottom a group of about 20 corpses, all soldiers from Domemba. Surely prisoners executed for defeat, a criminal act. Watching the footsteps on the ground, I knew who was the first to die and the last. He knew Captain Carmaine from when they went to Tame with the great caravan via the Dragon's Ridge. Agnorok had decided to accompany the scouts rather than stay with the king's entourage. Captain Carmaine had accepted him as one of his men and treated him well despite being a mediocre horseman. The half-orc spat as he closed the captain's eyes. May the goddess Thani be fair to you. He observed that the weapon with which he had been executed was still embedded in his side. It was not a normal dagger. It was very beautifully workmanship, had a gold hilt, and on the pommel had been engraved in ivory a lion in an attack position. The blade was also beautifully crafted and had a razor-sharp edge, a lethal weapon in the right hands. The one who caused this massacre is the general of the legion, half-orc. Agnorok raised his head. The one who spoke to him was Princess Nasmarina, the one who had once wanted to sneak into the chambers of Aris, now wearing combat armor and was smiling at the half-orc, who showed the dagger to the princess. Nasmarina examined him. She knew the general very well. Since the princess, thanks to her beauty and above all her intelligence, was sent by her father as an ambassador to the Republic to request its help against the alliance, Domebra's request was rejected. But that did not prevent her from being invited to some of the famous parties held by the senatorial families, some of them sympathetic to the cause of Domemba and its gems. On some evening he coincided with General Adrian, who always carried that knife visible. It seemed to be one of his favorites. Nesmarina was also a skilled warrior and loved her father very much. In the defense of the palace she had established herself as a competent captain, and together with Loranthus they had led the attack after the collapse of the wall. Even so, she was next to the hero of the blood mines and admired how Agnorok was able to mourn the death of any soldier. The princess knelt in front of the corpses. General Adrian would be furious. He can't stand to lose. It is not dignified to end someone like this. Nesmarina smiled at the half-orc. It is an Agnorok war. The honor only remains for the bards and scholars when they write their books. Adrian wants to send a message. He wants my father dead. Agnorok put the dagger away, placing it on his belt. Then I will return it to its owner, princess. Half-orc, General Adrian de Paulo is big game hunter. The half-orc smiled before answering. But hunting, after all. They spent the next day in the palace of Domemba. King Dasmir and Loranthus informed Dubok and the rest of their adventures during the siege. Fortunately the army of Scythia was not prepared to attack a fortress. Only when the other armies of the League arrived as reinforcements and under the efficient command of General Adrian was when the situation became critical, but fortune had helped them. But they could not stop. Now they had to liberate the Black Castle where the troops under the command of Aris were located. so they knew the situation was under control. The Black Castle was much more impregnable than the royal palace since the latter had not been designed to withstand a siege. Domemba decided to return to Kazmin with part of the forces. The kingdom had to be protected from a future attack. It was decided that a good part of the army of the League would accompany Agnorok and Kush to liberate the Black Castle. Troops from Domemba commanded by Princess Nazmarina would also go. They set off the next day, as always using Vanus as a messenger by tapping into her Kendali qualities. Thus, when the Kendali presented itself to Aris, it gave it a letter with Domemba's orders and also updated it with the latest news on the general situation of the war. Aris was an extraordinary tactician. He had prepared the castle very well to withstand the siege, and seeing that the arrival of the army of the League gave them a momentary advantage, it was best not to waste it. He made a pact with Agnorok and Kush that his advance would be moderate and feigned some weakness in front of the besiegers, all to provoke their attack. They wanted to do the same maneuver as in the Domemba palace. But the troops besieging the Black Castle had received the news of the arrival of the army of the League. The alliance did not want to suffer a new defeat in a place that was not strategically essential to the course of the war. So a few days before Agnorok's army arrived, they abandoned their positions and retreated to the south. So when they arrived at the Black Castle, Kush and Agnorok were greeted by Aris and his cousins without much news. The war then entered a phase of false truce. There were some skirmishes in the southeast but little, and the bulk of the army was placed in the most central position of the kingdom, Kazmin. There the spies were talking about a reorganization of the alliance army. They had received reinforcements, and this time it seemed that they had chosen to advance as a single block instead of dividing into different factions. They are looking for a great battle, Domemba said as he looked at the map. The war is dragging on too long for everyone. The soldiers are starting to get tired of so much fighting. It is said that in Albion support for the war begins to be questioned. We should give them what they want. Aris added. I don't think it's a good option. King Dasmir was quite reluctant to conflicts in the open field. It's actually the best option, if we let winter come. They can be reinforced, we cannot. I doubt that we will get more troops from the League, and also many of them will not want to stay another year. Even if we have a numerical disadvantage now, it will be much worse next year. A victory in a battle would totally demoralize them. The risk is high if we lose. Gosberg, who was sitting drinking and smoking, ignoring what they were talking about, quit smoking. Your grandfather, the first king of the Dasmir dynasty, risked everything, and that's why he won the war. Nothing else was needed, as if they were the orders of a general. Gosberg's words were the last spur to corroborate the decision. It will be done as you wish, a decisive battle.